standing in for Diana until she's able to come on. Thank you. Over to you, John.
Good morning, colleagues. Thank you very much, Nga, for the invite. Just a quick introduction about myself. My name is John Mdluli. I'm currently employed by the organization called the Oram Institute, which is a public health benefit organization. But we also do quite a lot of clinical trial work from phase 1 up until phase 3 clinical trials. And I must also say that I'm very privileged because within 5 of our clinical research sites in Oram, we participated in a clinical trial that tested the Pfizer vaccine as well as J&J vaccine. So that is all about Oram. But moving from Oram, Oram is also a secretariat for a coalition of civil society organization, which we have about 26 civil society organizations within SATAC. So SATAC is an abbreviation for Strengthening Africa Health Technologies Advocacy Coalition. We are a South African-based coalition. So basically, when it comes to my motivation really to engage in this discussion, I find an equitable and transparent pandemic agreement as an opportunity really, where we can move forward our advocacy agenda. But most importantly, I think what we need to think of is the agreement is in place, and within this broader agreement, there are also other sub-agreements that I will refer to. And I think the biggest question that we need to look at is how do we operationalize this agreement? How do we make it a reality? So reality in the sense that we do have a CDC agreement that talks about local manufacturing. So the question will be, really, let us look at what World Health Organization is saying and how do we then move other commitments, because basically the fact that it's an agreement, it means there are certain commitments, and kind of start looking at how do we move those commitments in order to prepare ourselves and also to respond to the pandemic. And then secondly, I think in South Africa, we were very privileged when South Africa was chosen to be the first country to really look at your mRNA tech transfer infrastructural building, because it basically it was recommended by World Health Organization, but started in Africa and in South Africa, and since then we have really seen a lot of development as far as this tech transfer is concerned, where the commitments are now being spread to other parts of Africa. And then again, we can't look at in this agreement in isolation. I think we've got commitments from organizations such as your PVMA, where there's a commitment to say we need to produce 60% of vaccine by 2040. So it's a question of us again to say, let us look at this bigger umbrella and look at these other commitments and kind of try to look at how do we align all these commitments. However, colleagues, another point to consider is that much as there is this agreement, we still have a long way to go. And what I mean by long way, I simply means that even though there's been an agreement, even though we have seen a lot of progress, there has also been a lot of challenges. For example, challenges such as your or building local capacity, challenges relating to scalability, challenges relating to regulatory frameworks which are being used by different countries, and finding a way of how do we bring everybody together. I know when I speak about regulatory framework, one can argue and say, but we've got AMA ratification negotiations that are currently taking place. Yes, I fully agree, but not all 55 countries in Africa have got to a stage where we are now comfortable and say we can rectify AMA. So again, I'm saying let us look into the bigger umbrella and look at what has been happening in the continent and try to align. In conclusion, I will also like to pose a challenge, Agri and colleagues, to say for the first time again, in 2025, Africa will be hosting the G20 summit, and the summit will be happening in South Africa. And as you might be aware, Nga, there's been a lot of engagement that has been happening in preparation for the G20 summit. And maybe we can then start thinking about how do we bring the discussion about this pandemic agreement into the G20 summit, because it's not a one-sided activity. It involves a lot of activities, and I think this really is an opportunity for Africa to really advocate for what we think is equitable and what we think is fair for us. I would like to stop there for a while,
Sure.
and thank you very much.
Sure. Thank you, John, for sharing with us those insights. We actually all agree that the agreement is a lifesaver for future and current pandemics, and we agree that we need to deliberate on how to operationalize this agreement. However, the question, in place is the agreement equitable? Before we even go into the operationalization, we appreciate the insights you're sharing and opportunities that we can engage in, like the G20 summit, and we look forward to being given opportunity and platform to engage as civil society and other stakeholders into all those processes. I would like to again invite Agri. Agri, I would like you to, because you have been engaged in these processes and you're still engaged, is it possible for you to share with the audience how this agreement can be structured to ensure that low middle income countries are not left behind in accessing essential health products like vaccines and diagnostics? But you could also throw for us insights, because of course the listeners eager to know where are we in terms of these negotiations. Can you share with us the status and some key progress, and also highlight for us how this agreement should be structured to benefit middle income countries this time around? You can come through, Agri.
Thank you. Thank you, Diana. And yeah, just a quick update in terms of where things are. I alluded in my opening statement that we've had 11, excuse me, we've had 11 INB sessions, and they're not just 11, they've been 11 point, there've been some other smaller or, multiple sessions within one phase. Like when you hear of INB1, INB2, usually there would be two blocks of 2 weeks meetings. That's what constitutes the one, full negotiating window. But towards the end, when there was hope to really get something nailed down before the World Health Assembly this year, that was May this year, there were several other, multiple meetings within one, session. Like there was INB1, INB11, and INB11 part one, part B, part. So just to give you a clue that it's been a very intense process with lots of discussions and several issues remaining unlocked or remaining deadlocked. And unfortunately, the issues that remain deadlocked are the ones, or the contentious ones, are the ones which are really promising, a lot in terms of shifting the needle towards the equity agenda that we all are very, concerned about. So yeah, so we didn't manage to get the treaty approved in or agreement. It's not called a treaty now. At the beginning, it was called a treaty, but because of several political considerations of different countries, I think the term that has been settled on is an agreement. So what we have is an ongoing intergovernmental negotiating body, working towards securing an agreement, a pandemic agreement to prepare the world, to help create a framework that will prepare the world for, managing, preventing, managing, and responding to future pandemic threats. What we have seen so far is that we didn't secure that agreement, and then there was an approval from the last World Health Assembly of an extension for 1 year. So where we are now is an extension that should ideally run until next World Health Assembly in May next year. But the ambition that has been voiced by the leadership of this process, the Secretariat and the World Health Organization leadership, is that there's a real desire to have this concluded by December through convening of a special World Health Assembly. And we are moving into INB12 now substantively. We've had a few informal sessions which were winding up and just laying out the framework for how the next steps were going to be. So that's pretty much defined, but now the substantive next step negotiation is starting on 4th and running until 15th of November. That's INB12. I'm sure some of us in this call will be attending. Personally, I have registered. It's both virtual and in person, so you can register to attend virtual and in person, and you need to be approved for you to attend it. And several issues still remain unresolved. So there was the conversations in INB11 that tried to really get things tied up, but did not land where we needed it to land. So several of the articles, there were very little movement in terms of resolving some of the outstanding issues. So as at the time when they were hoping to have to secure an agreement in May, there were a few texts that had been greened, which means there were like consensus on them. Some had been yellowed, significant, which means there was some movement towards an agreement, but an agreement was not secured, and others remained white, which means there was no movement in terms of consensus or points of agreement. So they were largely unresolved. So the challenges have been, how do we secure progress from the previous phase and not relitigate what had already been secured, like the green text, and make progress on what had been yellowed. So that was an attempt that was, a first attempt was made last month. I think it was in September, not last month, the month before last month, when the extended INB11 conversation took place, and very little movement happened, and therefore we are hoping that in INB12, that now will be happening from 4th to 15th, we should be able to make some significant moves. It's also important to know that it is in this period, between 4th and 15th, that they will need to have an indication. They will need to convince themselves that they are in a good position to signal the possibility of having that special meeting in December to possibly adopt an agreement. So we are all waiting to see how these conversations go. But unfortunately, most of the texts, most of the articles that were contentious, still remain contentious. And I will just say something about them, about one of the possible ways and a point of contention that we all are really trying to see how to work around, because there are some contentious propositions that we don't think will serve our interest. But just to mention that key articles around One Health, prevention of the prevention article 4, Article 5 remain contentious. Article 12, that is on PAPs, remain contentious. There have been some movement in Article 9, some movement on Article 11. And a number of movements also are not positive. Some of them are negative, like our assessment, looking at things from the equity lens. There's some movement in terms of securing an agreement and some language shaping, but those languages and not language that we think would really help us have an enforceable treaty that would secure substantive transformative impact towards the direction we want things to go, securing equity and really creating a framework, a platform for doing business differently, because we know some of the propositions are just still anchoring things on philanthropic, discretional, or conditional language that does not really create, grounded decrees that, give very strong directional, provisions of what needs to be done and how they need to be accounted for. So we are not very happy with even some of the green text or the yellow text, because the language is not as strong and not enforceable and not really driving the equity agenda. And so those are some of the areas that we still would want some conversation to take place. But the other unsettling thing that we're seeing is that there's quite some pressure to get things concluded by December. So a proposition has been made that some of the contentious articles, like the one on One Health, the one on pubs, be considered as annexes or or protocols that therefore will be deliberated later once the primary agreement is secured and the conference of parties established. And we think that would create it would open room for another protracted process that can go in any direction, because we think one